I want to tell you about the specific feeling of sitting across from someone you have loved for 3 years. Someone whose voice is the first thing you want to hear in the morning and the last thing you want to hear at night. And understanding, in the space of a single phone call, that everything they ever said to you was a performance. Not an exaggeration, not a misunderstanding. A performance. 3 years of I love you. 3 years of you are the only one. 3 years of plans and promises and the specific, intimate language that develops between two people who have been close long enough to build their own private vocabulary. All of it performed. The phone call came from a woman named Victoria. She was calm when she called, calmer than I was capable of being while I listened. She told me her name. She told me how long she had been with Ryan. She told me the things he had said to her, the plans he had made, the promises, the private language. And as she spoke, I heard the echo of my own relationship in everything she described. He had been with both of us simultaneously for the better part of 2 years. Not casually, seriously, in both directions, building 2 relationships with the same investment and the same language as if love were something that could be replicated without losing its meaning. I listened to Victoria for 23 minutes. When she finished, I thanked her. I hung up. I sat on my kitchen floor for a long time, then I made a decision that I want to tell you about. Not a dramatic decision. Not an immediate declaration of strength. Just a quiet, cold, absolutely certain decision that I was going to find out who I was without Ryan's version of me anywhere in the picture. My name is Emma. And what I found about myself, about what love actually looks like when it is real, about the life that was waiting on the other side of the most painful truth I have ever been told, is what this story is about. Stay with me. Because the ending is not about Ryan at all. Ryan and I met when I was 24. A mutual friends gathering, the kind of low-key evening where you end up in a corner conversation that goes longer than you expected and leaves you thinking about it on the drive home. He was attentive in the specific way that feels at 24 like being truly seen. He remembered things I mentioned in passing. He followed up on conversations days later. He had a quality of presence that made you feel when you were with him that nothing outside the room existed or mattered. I understand now that this quality, the full, focused attention, was a skill, not a feeling he had. A skill he had developed. There is a difference between someone who is present because they genuinely want to be and someone who has learned that presence is the most effective way to make another person feel attached. I did not know the difference at 24. I know it now. We were together for 3 years. I use the word together with the full weight of what I meant by it, not casually dating, not ambiguously involved, but genuinely committed in every way I understood commitment. I had turned down other relationships. I had built my daily life around the assumption that Ryan was a permanent structure in it. I had told my mother I thought he was the person I was going to marry. My mother, Linda, had listened to that and said something carefully neutral. She had met Ryan several times. She had never said anything negative about him to me, not directly, not specifically. But looking back at the specific quality of her careful neutrality, I think she saw something that I could not see from inside it. I did not ask her what she was not saying. I wish I had. But that is a thought that belongs to afterward, and in the before I was too inside the relationship to ask the questions that might have opened a door I was not ready to walk through. The relationship felt real. That is the most important thing I can tell you about those 3 years. It felt entirely, completely real. I was not naive or blind or foolishly optimistic. I was in love with someone who was very good at making himself feel real. That is the most difficult part of this story to explain, not the betrayal, which is simple enough in its mechanics, but the texture of the before. Because the before did not feel like a lie. It felt like my life. I need to tell you how Victoria found me because I think the how matters. She had found a card. A physical card, the kind that comes with flowers handwritten in Ryan's handwriting. She had found it in a jacket pocket while doing laundry. It was addressed to me. It said things that made the nature of our relationship immediately and unmistakably clear. She had photographed it. She had spent a week trying to decide what to do. Then she had found me through a mutual connection on a professional networking site. Carefully, methodically, the way someone does when they have made a considered decision rather than an impulsive one. She called on a Wednesday evening. She introduced herself. She told me what she had found and how she had found it. She told me how long she had been with Ryan, 2 years and 4 months. She told me the things he had told her about their relationship. She was precise and she was calm, and I could hear, underneath the calm, the specific effort of someone who has decided to do something difficult and is holding themselves together to do it correctly. At one point I interrupted her. I said, "Why are you telling me this?" She said, "Because I would want someone to tell me." That answer, so simple, so completely without agenda, is the one I have thought about more than anything else in this story. Victoria did not call me to hurt Ryan or to claim him or to establish precedence. She called me because she had found out something that she believed I deserved to know, and her moral compass was clear enough that she acted on that belief even when acting on it was difficult. I did not know Victoria. We had never met. We had been unknowing participants in the same deception for over 2 years. And in the 23 minutes of that phone call, she demonstrated more basic human decency than Ryan had managed across 3 years of a relationship with me. When the call ended, I called Caroline. She answered immediately. It was 9 o'clock in the evening, and she answered on the first ring, which told me something about the quality of what we had built over 10 years of friendship. I told her in approximately 4 sentences. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I'm coming over." She was there in 20 minutes. She has never told me whether she suspected anything before that night. I have never asked. Some things are more useful left as they are. I called Ryan the following morning. Not that night. I needed the night to move from shock into something steadier. By morning I had steadier. He answered on the third ring. His voice was normal, the familiar, comfortable voice of someone who does not yet know that what is about to happen is about to happen. I told him Victoria had called me. The silence that followed lasted approximately 4 seconds. 4 seconds is not a long time. It is long enough to understand everything you need to understand about whether a denial is coming. No denial came. What came instead was an explanation. Long, careful, and structured in a way that I recognized, even in the moment, even through everything I was feeling, as prepared. As if some part of him had known this conversation was a possibility and had been building toward it. He said he had not planned for it to go on as long as it had. He said he had feelings for both of us that were real and that he had not known how to resolve. He said the situation had grown beyond what he had originally intended and that he understood he had handled it badly. He said, and this is the sentence I remember most clearly, "I never stopped loving you." I sat with that for a moment. Then I said, "Ryan, you cannot love 2 people simultaneously with the same language and the same promises and the same investment for 2 years and call either of those things love. What you did was not love, it was management. You managed us, and I am done being managed." He said my name. I said goodbye. I did not answer when he called back. I did not read the messages he sent over the following days. I blocked him on everything, not out of anger, though the anger was real, out of the same practical recognition that had guided the decision to call him in the morning rather than the night before. Drama serves the person who created the situation. Clarity serves me. I had chosen clarity. I want to be honest about what the weeks following the call actually looked like, because the version where confronting Ryan was the turning point and everything accelerated from there would be dishonest. The grief was real. Not just for Ryan, though losing the relationship was painful in ways that were complicated by the fact that I was also losing the version of the previous 3 years that I had believed in. The grief was for the story I had been living, for the future I had been building in my mind around a structure that had turned out to be false, for the specific, disorienting experience of having to go back through 3 years of memories and understand them differently. That last part, the retroactive reframing, was the most difficult, because the memories themselves had not changed. The evenings that had felt real still existed exactly as I had experienced them. What had changed was their meaning. And adjusting to the new meaning without being able to change the memories was a particular kind of grief that I had not encountered before. I also, in those weeks, had to deal with the social dimension of the situation. Mutual friends who had known us as a couple. The particular awkwardness of explaining what had happened without either minimizing it or performing devastation for an audience. The exhausting work of being a person in a social network while processing something significant. Caroline was the person I leaned on most heavily. She did not require me to manage my grief for her comfort. She sat with me through the unmanaged version of it and did not once suggest a timeline or a silver lining before I was ready. My mother called every day. She did not push. She listened. On one call about 3 weeks in, she said, "Emma, you loved him completely and honestly. That was never the problem, he was." That sentence did something specific for me. It separated the quality of my love from the quality of his behavior, a distinction that I had been struggling to make because the failure of the relationship had been making me doubt the validity of my own feelings. My feelings had been valid. They had been directed at someone who was not who I believed him to be. Those are two separate things. Separating them was the beginning of the recovery. Caroline suggested therapy. Not in the way people suggest therapy when they do not know what else to say, specifically, with a specific name, having done the specific research of someone who was taking the suggestions seriously rather than making it as a reflex. Dr. Sarah Brooks had a practice focused on relationship recovery and identity reconstruction after significant relational loss. She was direct, warm, and possessed of the particular quality of someone who has heard enough people's most difficult truths to be genuinely unshockable without having become detached. Our first session, I told her everything. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked, "What do you believe this experience says about you?" I told her honestly, I believed it said I was not good at reading people, that I had missed something significant for 3 years, that my judgment could not be trusted. She nodded slowly, then she said, "And what does it actually say about you?" I did not know how to answer, she said. "It says that you are capable of loving someone fully and consistently, that you are someone who invests genuinely rather than cautiously, that you stayed present in a relationship for 3 years while bringing everything you had to it. None of that is a flaw, all of that is a quality. The person who failed in this situation was not the one who loved honestly." I sat with that for a long time. She said something else in that session that I have returned to more times than I can count. She said, "You did not lose 3 years, you spent 3 years learning at considerable cost exactly what you will never accept again. That knowledge is real. It belongs to you. He cannot take it back." I went to therapy for 8 months. It was the best investment I made in the entire period following the relationship. Not because it fixed anything. Nothing was broken in me that needed fixing, but because it gave me a space to sort through what had happened with someone skilled enough to help me sort it without losing myself in the sorting. By month 4, I was no longer grieving Ryan. I was building something else entirely. Here is what nobody tells you about the end of a long relationship that turned out to be built on a lie. The rebuilding is not just emotional. It is practical and structural and involves an almost complete reassembly of your daily life. I had built my routine around Ryan's presence. Not in a dependent way, I had my own career, my own friendships, my own life running alongside the relationship. But the relationship had been woven into the fabric of the daily in ways that required active unweaving. I started with the practical. The restaurant we had always gone to on Saturday evenings. I went there alone, deliberately, on a Saturday 3 weeks after the call. I ordered what I wanted rather than what we always shared. I read a book. I left feeling like I had reclaimed something small but mine, then the larger things. A trip I had been wanting to take that Ryan had always found reasons to delay. I booked it alone. 2 weeks in a country I had been talking about visiting for 4 years. I went in September. It was the first time in 3 years I had been completely alone with my own thoughts for an extended period, and it was, unexpectedly, one of the most clarifying experiences of my adult life. I came back from that trip knowing something that I had suspected but not confirmed. I liked my own company, not as a consolation prize for the absence of someone else's. Genuinely, substantively, I found myself interesting to be alone with. That sounds like a small thing. It was not a small thing. It was the foundation of everything that followed. Professionally, the period after Ryan was the most productive of my career to that point. I had been working in brand strategy and had been performing well but not exceptionally, operating at a level that was competent rather than ambitious. In the year following the relationship, I took on 2 projects that were outside my comfort zone, produced work I was genuinely proud of, and received recognition that moved me into a different professional bracket. I do not think the quality of my work improved because Ryan was gone. I think the energy I had been spending on managing a relationship that required more maintenance than I had understood was freed up for something else. And the something else turned out to be excellent work. By the end of that year, I was not the same version of myself who had sat on a kitchen floor after a 23-minute phone call. I was someone built from what that person had learned. I want to tell you about Daniel carefully because I think this part of the story is the easiest to misread, and I do not want it to be misread. This is not a story about getting over one person by finding another. I did not find Daniel because I was looking for a replacement for Ryan or a proof that I was lovable or a redemption arc that required a romantic conclusion. I found Daniel 14 months after the phone call from Victoria, at a point when I was genuinely not looking, not in the performing not looking way, but in the actual way of someone whose life was full enough that adding to it was not a priority. We met at a professional event. He was a colleague of a colleague in a different industry, which meant we had no professional overlap and no particular reason to extend the conversation beyond the polite. We extended it anyway. He was not immediately electric. I want to say that clearly because I think the mythology around real love involves a lightning bolt and the reality is usually quieter than that. He was interesting. He was funny without performing it. He asked questions that told me he was listening to the answers rather than waiting for his turn. He called 2 days after the event, not a text, a call. He said he had enjoyed the conversation and would I like to continue it over dinner. I said yes. On the first dinner he did something that I have thought about many times since, and that seems on the surface small. He arrived first, which I had not expected, and when I came in he stood up. Not dramatically. Just stood up because I had arrived. The gesture was so ordinary and so completely without self-consciousness that it hit me in a way I did not immediately understand. Later that evening I understood it. Ryan had never done that. Not once in 3 years. Not because he was deliberately unkind, but because his attention, which felt so present and focused in our early relationship, had always been performing rather than giving. The difference between someone who stands up because you have arrived and someone who performs attentiveness as a strategy for attachment is the difference between being seen and being managed. Daniel stood up because I had arrived. That was it. That was the whole thing. We dated for 4 months before I told him about Ryan, not because I was hiding it, but because it was my history and I was waiting until it felt relevant to share rather than sharing it as a disclaimer up front. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "Thank you for telling me," not advice, not commentary, not the performance of the appropriate reaction. Just, "Thank you for telling me, I knew then," not in a lightning bolt way. In the quiet, certain way of someone who has finally found the thing they had been looking at a reproduction of for 3 years. 2 years after Victoria's phone call, 14 months into what Daniel and I were building, which by that point had become the most uncomplicated and genuinely sustaining relationship of my adult life, Ryan sent me a message. It was long. I will not reproduce it here, not because of copyright, but because its specific contents are less important than its shape. It was the shape of a message sent by someone who has watched a chapter of their life close and decided, in the closing, that they would like to reopen it. He said he had done significant thinking. He said he understood the damage he had done. He said he knew he had no right to ask for anything, but that he wanted me to know he thought about the relationship often and that his feelings for me had been real, whatever other failures had accompanied them. He said, "I don't know what your life looks like now. I hope it is good." I read it once. I thought about it for less time than I expected to need. Then I wrote back 2 sentences. I told him that my life was genuinely good and that I wished him the same. Nothing more, no elaboration, no door. 2 sentences that closed the subject without cruelty and without anything that could be mistaken for an invitation. I showed the message to Daniel that evening, not because I needed his pee.